The current running back landscape isn't exactly what we expected. While the usual suspects such as Christian McCaffrey, James Cook, Bijan Robinson, Saquon Barkley, and Jonathan Taylor remain staples inside the top 12, we also have some interesting backs such as Javonte Williams, Travis Etienne, and Jaylen Warren making some early season noise. It's only week number 3, and plenty of things could still change. The inevitable fantasy football machine, it marches to its own script. And with that in mind, here are RotoBaller's start and sit options at the running back position for week number 3. And we kick things off with James Cook of the Buffalo Bills as they take on the Miami Dolphins. Don't look now, but James Cook is currently averaging 23.9 fantasy points per game through 2 weeks, which is 7.2 more fantasy points per game than he averaged last season when he scored 18 touchdowns. Then again, Cook's 3 rushing touchdowns thus far have him on pace for 24 this season. Those who said regression was coming may be doing that Homer Simpson meme, disappearing into the bushes. In 2024, those 18 touchdowns, they came on 239 touches and a rate of 7.5%. So far, early on, Cook has 40 touches, resulting in 3 scores and a rate of, yes, you guessed it, 7.5%. According to the Buffalo Bills PR, Cook recorded his 5th 40-plus yard touchdown run in the first half last week. And since joining the league back in 2022, Cook's 5 40-plus yard touchdowns, that leads the National Football League. Turning our attention to week number 3, those numbers are likely to improve even more considering the Buffalo Bills are facing the Miami Dolphins, a defense that is allowing 26.95 fantasy points per game, the 6th most to the running back position, surrendering 203 yards on the ground as well as 146 receiving yards. Last weekend, it was Ramondre Stevenson who had himself a ball game, running for 54 yards on 11 carries and catching 5 passes for an additional 88 yards. The second running back that I'm firing up this week, we're going to go take a little bit of an outside shot here. It is Isaiah Pacheco here as the Kansas City Chiefs are facing the New York Giants. Now, since returning from that fractured fibula, Pacheco, he hasn't been able to get in the groove. In games in which he's played since he's returned, Pacheco's average is 4.8 fantasy points per game and earned just 18 opportunities thus far in 2025. So why is Pacheco a start this week? Because the Chiefs are pissed off. They're 0-2 and they're looking to take it out on somebody. And that someone happens to be the New York Giants, a defense that has allowed 24.29 fantasy points to the running back position a season ago, which happened to be the second most. This season, the Giants have yielded a league worst 30.15 fantasy points to the position, allowing 245 yards on the ground and 3 touchdowns. Last week, it was Javonte Williams who totaled 130 yards and 25 fantasy points a week after Jacory Krosky-Merritt dropped 14.2 fantasy points on this defense while averaging 8.2 yards per carry. The third start of the week, Kenneth Walker III of the Seattle Seahawks as they take on the New Orleans Saints. Vindication! Yes, V is for vindication. It doesn't matter how else you want to look at it. The Seattle Seahawks running back churned out 105 rushing yards on 13 attempts while finding the end zone, leading to an impressive 18.8 fantasy points last week. Despite a subpar week 1 performance, 43.2% of Walker's yardage came on explosive runs. On Walker's 23 rushing attempts, Walker forced a missed tackle on 5 separate occasions while averaging 2.43 yards after contact per attempt, the 10th highest amongst running backs with at least 20 rushing attempts so far this season. Now, meanwhile, only Travis Etienne, Derrick Henry, and Jonathan Taylor have averaged more yards per carry than Walker's 5.43. This week, Walker will continue to get that momentum going, facing a New Orleans Saints team that has allowed 254 yards to the position and 25 fantasy points per contest thus far. In week number 1, New Orleans, they surrendered 14.4 fantasy points to James Conner, while Christian McCaffrey hit that Saints defense for 22.7 fantasy points in week number 2. Now, how about those sits? How about those running backs that you should be fading this week? It starts with Kyren Williams of the Los Angeles Rams as they take on the Philadelphia Eagles. Something of note that should concern fantasy managers is Kyren Williams' usage is particularly down in the red zone. While Williams has been responsible for 77% of the backfield opportunities, last week, Blake Corum got 2 of the 3 opportunities inside the 10 and the only touch inside the 5. Corum's touchdown run, it is notable. Now, Ryan Heath of Fantasy Points, he pointed out that Williams' 17 fantasy points per game last season 5.2 came from touches inside the 5-yard line. That's going to drop him down to about 12 fantasy points per game. If Williams continues to lose work here, it would undoubtedly have an adverse effect on Williams' fantasy outlook moving forward. To further complicate matters, this week the Rams are facing an Eagles team that only allowed 5 touchdowns to backs a season ago, the second fewest. And if we are to believe Sean McVay, we can expect Corum to continue to get 30 to 35% of the snaps moving forward, as is much more in alignment with how the team wants this Rams backfield to operate. Another sit this week is Quinshon Judkins there of the Cleveland Browns as they take on the Green Bay Packers. There were several unwritten rules if you grew up in the 80s and spent a good portion of your childhood in the 90s. One of those rules was you came home no matter what when the streetlights came on. There was literally commercials saying, do you know where your kids are? At 10 p.m. And parents, hey, they probably didn't know. Now, the second rule, always call collect when looking for a ride because those quarters were better used at the arcade. Third, hands off the boombox, people. Switching songs, that was a breach of trust. That mixtape was the anthem for the day, leading us to number 4, don't go chasing waterfalls. Music was important in TLC. They taught a generation that nothing good comes from chasing waterfalls. Today, in the fantasy world, nothing good comes from chasing fantasy points. Last week, Quinshon Judkins' NFL debut, the rookie averaged 6.1 yards per carry on 10 rushing attempts, which may lead managers to rushing him into their lineups. As good as Judkins looked, it was against a Ravens team which conceded 102 yards to James Cook the previous week. The Browns, they host the Green Bay Packers defense this week, and in 2 contests, they have allowed just 78 yards on the ground, including completely shutting down the Lions duo of Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery. Montgomery, he was held to 2.5 yards per carry, while Gibbs, he was limited to 2.1 yards per attempt. In the final sit of the week, one of my favorites, it's Chuba Hubbard of the Carolina Panthers as they take on the Atlanta Falcons. Another running back facing a difficult matchup. Hubbard, he has been a top 24 fantasy staple since the start of last season. Now the Falcons defense, against this position, you cannot ignore what they've been able to do. Last week, Jordan Mason, Aaron Jones Sr., they were limited just 53 yards rushing. And through 2 weeks, Atlanta, they have allowed just 106 yards on the ground, including a stifling performance against Bucky Irving, holding the Buccaneers running back to 37 rushing yards on 14 attempts. Now Hubbard, he posted back-to-back 17-point performances and is currently a RB1 territory type back for fantasy managers. However, I have to caution managers to consider the entire picture. As good as Hubbard has been in the pass game with 8 receptions for 71 yards and a pair of touchdowns, he has struggled to get things going in the run game. On 26 attempts this season, Hubbard has churned out just 95 yards and an average of 3.65 yards per attempt. Seeing Hubbard, it's going to be tough. Last season, teams found success in the pass game involving their backs, which the Buccaneers did in week number 1. However, that wasn't the case in week number 2, as Mason recorded the 2 lone receptions out of the backfield for 8 yards. Now, if you haven't already done so, hit those like and follow buttons and be sure to head to RotoBaller.com for all the latest fantasy news and analysis. We'll see you next time.